Hi there, this is the tutorial video to enable you to complete the TruEye coordinates test. The first thing that we need to do is, I'm going to show you quickly how to move around AutoCAD. Now, I'm hoping that you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, because that makes things much easier. With the scroll wheel, you can actually zoom in and out by scrolling your mouse wheel, and you can also if you find that you actually position your cursor over where you want to see and scroll, it will take you to that place, if you like. So yeah, I'm just zooming in on point 6, zoom in on point 3, and then you can zoom out again as well. The other thing you can do is if you hold the mouse, the scroll wheel down, you can pan around the drawing, and this is quite useful so that you can actually see where you're going at a decent scale, and you can zoom out, zoom in again, and pan around. So that's the way that the easiest way to get around AutoCAD. So without further ado, what we're going to do in this session is create a centerline. I've already got the layer up here, I'm just hovering over at the moment, and that's a layer which has got a green line type. And what we're going to do is, you see we have a trench here, which is the yellow box, which extends all around the drawing. The blue box is the actual full trench, and the yellow box is the inner and outer face brickwork that you can see. And within that we have a center line, which I've got in grey here. And that is actually the center line of our dig. Now, some drawings don't have this center line, so you literally only have perhaps the blue line or the yellow line. So what we need to do is actually create the center line, which is going to be the midpoint between the blue lines and also the yellow lines. What's useful about this drawing is that it shows us that the actual trench is 600 millimeters wide, so 0.6 of a meter. And what we can actually do is create a line from the corner of here to the perpendicular of this line, or we can actually copy a line. Say I could copy this grey line from the end point of the line and move it across to the end point of, or the corner of this, and then trim the line out. There's a whole load of other ways of doing it. You can offset. So you can type O for offset and offset this blue line by 300. Yeah, so there's a whole load of ways and methods. We could also, with this drawing, we could create a line from the intersection of these two grey lines here and take it all the way around. But for the purposes of this video, I'll quickly show you how to actually draw a line and take it across from the corner here to the perpendicular of that line, and that will then give us a center line that we can then do another perpendicular line here and across down here, and so on. So the first thing we need to do is type L, which will create a line, and we're going to go from the end point of this line. Now if there's a whole load of snaps that are going on, so at the moment it's showing me, there you go, it's showing me the endpoint now, but before that it was showing me the node, and you can tell what it's showing you by moving around and then waiting for a second, and it will tell you. So I'm on the endpoint at the moment, so that's the easiest way of finding it. So we've got endpoint. Now at the moment I don't have a perpendicular snap set for this line, so the easiest way of getting that is to hold shift key down on the keyboard and right click, and you'll find here that you have a perpendicular option. So I'm going to click on that, and then I will click on left click on the perpendicular icon, and that will create us our first line. So what I'm going to need to do is create the line from the midpoint of this line down to the next line, which I'm going to create here to the midpoint of that line. So let's do it again. Type L for line, from that endpoint, shift right click, perpendicular of this blue line here, Okay, and then I'm going to create a line, alpha line again, from the, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use midpoint of this line. Okay, it doesn't look like I've got midpoint on here, so shift and right click again, select midpoint. Oh, that's interesting. So our actual grid line is not perfectly central to our 600mm line. So what I'll do in a minute is I can measure that and just see whether that's actually correct or not, whether that 600mm, whether that is actually 600mm or not. So I've got a measure tool here, so I'm going to click on measure, and I'm going to go from I'm going to go from the endpoint of that to the, and I'm doing shift and right click again to the endpoint of that. Okay, so yeah, that's not particularly helpful. I've got 0.597, so our grid is a little bit out, which is slightly annoying. So I'm going to do another measure here from the endpoint of that to the endpoint of that. Again, that's showing me 0.597. So at least we've got the same dimension all over here. So it's showing a 600 wide trench, but we're 3mm out of, or 300mm out, because we're actually drawing in meters. So, or 30mm out, sorry. So we know that that is our first line. Basically, we're at the mercy of this trench being the correct size, and if it's not, that's not down to you, so don't worry about that. So what I'll do is I'll create another line going upwards and take that perpendicular to that, and do the same here. And then I shall use a line from the midpoint of that line. Shift and right click, midpoint of that line. Okay, so what I can now do is I can actually fillet these lines there and there together. So F for fillet, and it says select first object, so that's the first object I want, and that is the second object I want. Now you can see that when you select the second object, down at the command prompt you can see it says fillet current settings mode equals trim radius equals 0. That's something that's quite important to check, that if you're filleting something you need to make sure the radius is always 0, because if it's not 0 you won't get the exact corner that you need. So just double check that. If it's not 0, type R for radius, I'll just show you quickly there, and type 0, and then you can actually select the second line, and I can see that when I zoom in that I've got a nice decent corner there. So that's how you would create your center line for your dig. And what I'll do is I'll quickly create that to create the center line all the way around here, and I'll join you again when I've done that. Okay, so I've created my center line now. So point 1 goes from the corner of that. Point 2, you'll see it's virtually on the line, but it's just slightly out, and I've taken the center line of the line which goes perpendicular to those. Point 3 is the same. We're using these lines as guides really. So I've created endpoint perpendicular there. Same with point 4. I've filleted them all together. Point 5 is slightly odd, as is point 6, in that the actual trench is slightly offset. You might be able to see it here, that the distance from here down compared to there up. So the yellow distance is slightly less here, and it's actually worse on this side. It's a lot higher there, or rather the actual white box. You see the white box is sort of, it's in the center of the white of the yellow lines, but the actual yellow is offset differently. It's a bit odd. So our grid line is probably what they want us to follow, but the midline that I've got here gives us this line. So I would expect you to do the same as me, which is to create a line from this corner here going up there, and then copy that line, which is C on the on the keyboard. Select the line with the left click, go from the endpoint of that to the endpoint of that, and that creates that line that you then use. You then go from the midpoint of that across, shift right click to the midpoint of that, and you see that line hits around here. So we've got all of our points now, filleted them together, so we can see exactly where our points need to go. I'll leave these guidelines on, so you don't need to delete them because they're just guidelines. We can delete them later if you want to. So the next stage is to actually create a point on each of our corners, and the way you can do that, there's a simple way of doing it, which is you type in multiple, okay, and hit return, and then it asks you to what you actually want to, what command you want to do, and we're actually going to do, we want a multiple point. So we're creating points now, okay, and so I'm going to say the first point is going to be on our point 1. You can zoom out and in with the mouse, as I said earlier, and we're going to go from the endpoint of that. So that's our first point. Our second point is going to be where we filleted the lines together. Third point will be point 3, which is looking pretty good actually. Point 4 is the next, which is just slightly out. If you're in any doubt, just zoom in a little bit further. And what we'll do is we'll regenerate the page in a minute, or the drawing, once we've zoomed out a bit, and you'll see that we've got, so that's our 5th point, which is that one, and then we've got our 6th point here. Okay, once you're finished, you can just hit escape, and that takes you out of the command. So what we'll do is we'll just zoom out, so we've got that in the middle of the page, and pan around, and then type in RE, which actually regenerates the page, and you can see now that our points are showing up as decent sized crosses, which actually helps us to be able to actually see where they are and actually touch on them when we want to get information from them. So if I zoom in on point 1 and I type ID, which basically identifies what it is, and we can sort of hover over a corner, and we can see that where the cursor is, it comes up and shows us a node, and we've got a little circle inside of our point, or outside of the center of the point, and we can actually, so once we've typed in ID and then hit enter on the keyboard and then selected our node, we can actually left click on the mouse and it tells us the X and Y coordinates. But there's another easier way of doing that to export all of those points out, which is using the multiple command again. So we type in multiple, return, type ID, because it's asking us for a command, and we then say, okay, I want that node, zoom out and in again, that node, point, that point, that point, and that point. And what you'll find is that if you hit F2 on the keyboard, you can see all of the command, all of the previous nodes and points come up on the screen. So what you can then do is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've got 6 points here. They're the ones I want. So by hitting F2, you can then select those with your mouse and drag down, control that, and then you can paste that in to your Word document. And we can. Okay. Well, for now, I can just paste it into a blank document because I've got my network off at the moment, so the file's not showing. So basically, Control C, Control V will get you out of that. And that is all of the points. So I'm going to quickly delete that page so you can't see it. And that is the tutorial done. Thank you very much.